Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, it's me and Alex breaking down the big news this week when it comes to IU sports, and that is the hiring of Scott Dolson as the successor to Fred Glass as Indiana's athletic director. So we talk about that, what Alex's initial impressions are, what that means for Archie Miller, what, if anything, he expects to be different with the athletic department moving forward. And then after that, we talk about a couple of special content announcements that we have, which I think that you are going to be really intrigued by. Well, I hope you are. Something to just help us pass the time here on this basketball-less March while we're all home with some extra time on our hands. And then we run through some questions that we got on the Inside the Hall forum about next year's roster, about Christian Lander, about what expectations should be for next year. So we talk about all of that on this week's edition of Podcast on the Rink. Before we get to all that, we don't have a sponsor this week officially, but we're still going to plug Home Field Apparel anyway because we love those guys. We really support what they're doing, and we especially support the way that they are handling this, the economic impact from what has gone on with the coronavirus and the pandemic, guaranteeing, their team's sick leave and, guaranteeing to, pick up the extra money if they have to cut hours, all that stuff. They've just, they've really tried to go about this the right way. And when you see a small business like that that's trying to do things the right way and do right by the people who work for them and the community that they're a part of, just makes you want to support them. And so everything, obviously, that we've said about Home Field Apparel all season long remains true. It remains a reason for you to go support them. Their gear is as comfortable as you will find, whether it's a short sleeve tee, a long sleeve tee, a hoodie, whatever it is, a crew neck sweater, whatever it is. And then, of course, all the unique logos that they have as well. Go to homefieldapparel.com, browse their entire IU collection. They have a couple new recent additions to the IU basketball stuff that they have, so make sure that you check that out. The Script Hoosiers. That's right, not just the Script Indiana, but the Script Hoosiers logo. So much great stuff there. So go to Home Field Apparel, support a local small business during a time of need for all small businesses. And look, even if you don't support Home Field Apparel, support as many small businesses as you can, because this is going to be a tough time for all of them. But go to Home Field Apparel. If you want to use the promo code, it is Brink, B-R-I-N-K. That will get you 20% off your entire purchase. Homefieldapparel.com, promo code Brink. All right, now let's bring in Alex Bozich, and here's our conversation about Scott Dolson and what to expect from IU next season. Well, Alex, obviously everything remains stopped on hold in the college basketball world and the sports world, really just in the world in general right now. But there was some important news for IU sports fans yesterday as the search for Fred Glass's replacement, his successor, I guess is the better word to say, as athletic director, came to a close. And Indiana announced that Scott Dolson, who had basically been Fred Glass's right-hand man for many, many years, was going to be named the new athletic director, beating out, it sounds like the other finalist was Chris Reynolds. Obviously, Pat Kraft from Temple was a name that had gotten mentioned. But Dolson ends up being the guy who was chosen. Obviously has a lot of experience at Indiana, starting back when he was a manager for Bob Knight on the basketball team. What's your reaction to Scott Dolson being the choice?
I'm not surprised by the news at all, and I'm actually pretty enthused about the hire. I think I don't know him much outside of obviously a professional relationship and seeing him at games and talking to him and so forth, but I know that Scott Dolson is very well respected within the athletic department. I think his hiring is going to bring a lot of continuity in terms of people in the department being able to kind of just move forward with a lot of the things that were already in place. I think we can all agree that IU athletics as a whole is in a pretty good spot in terms of most of the sports. Basketball, obviously, not where a lot of people would like it to be, but everything else, you kind of look at the infrastructure in place. A lot of the buildings that have been popping up along campus the last several years. Olson raised a lot of money and did a lot of great things kind of behind the scenes. It wasn't the name that a lot of people knew because that was Fred Glass, but he was his right hand man. And I think just from talking to Scott, he's a very positive person. He's a very outgoing, engaging person. I think a lot of the things that people liked about Fred Glass in terms of him being open and accessible are going to continue with Scott Dolson. And so for that reason, for those reasons, I think it's a good day for Indiana athletics. I think it's a good hire, and I'm excited to see how Scott does when he officially takes over. I think he's got a lot of experience, a lot of contacts, a lot of good relationships within the athletic department, and I think he's going to hit the ground running and do a good job.
As soon as Fred Glass announced that he'd be leaving, Scott Dolson's name was one of the first ones that was bandied about as a favorite for the position. Again, along with Chris Reynolds, along with Pat Kraft. So I agree with you. It's not at all a surprise that he was the choice. But do you think at all that the timing of it and everything that has happened over the last few weeks and the potential benefits of continuity, given just the upheaval that we've gone through just over the last couple weeks and probably will continue to go through for the next few months, do you think that contributed at all to wanting to choose Dolson and keep that continuity?
I mean, it's possible that it maybe had a little bit to do with it, but even a few weeks ago, if you would have asked me who I thought was going to get the job, I would have said that I thought Scott was going to get the first crack at it and be he was the front runner for a long time, I feel like. So I think that's an added bonus. Obviously we're all going through tumultuous times in the world in general, and I think anything you can do to keep that continuity. I mean, you definitely don't want to shake things up and to have huge changes in any organization right now because people are just so uncertain about futures and different things like that. And I think having a guy like Scott who is familiar with all the coaches, he knows everybody in the department. This is going to be a tough time to navigate in college athletics. We just saw the report yesterday where the NCAA, the revenue that they're going to lose from not having the NCAA tournament and the shortfall they're going to have from the from the tournament and the gap between what their insurance is going to cover. This is going to be a trying time in college athletics, and I think Scott seems to be a person who has kind of worked his way up the ladder in IU athletics. He's been around IU. He knows the ins and outs, and when you have a person like that, I feel like that people are comfortable with. I think that can inspire confidence in others that everything is going to kind of be okay here on the other side of all this. But I think that does have something to do with it. Although I don't necessarily think it was one of the major factors. I think he has for a while now been considered the front runner to land the position.
Specific to basketball, how do you think the hiring of Scott Dolson influences the pressure on Archie Miller heading into next season? Because on the one hand, if a new AD gets hired, you think, okay, well, the new AD might be a little bit impatient to bring his own guy in. If Indiana doesn't show real progress in Archie Miller's fourth year, maybe there's a quicker hook. On the other hand, you look at it, maybe Scott Dolson has more of a vested interest in it working with Archie Miller since he was there when he was hired, yet his name isn't really attached to it because that was more Fred Glass's hire. Like how do you think that's going to affect that heading into it? And obviously, Archie has shown progress for the first 3 years, but I think we all agree that more progress will need to be shown in year 4. And he hasn't really taken kind of that quantum leap forward or that, jump instead of maybe step forward that would, maybe insulate him against some of the criticism that will come if the team struggles next year.
Yeah, I think it's first of all, I'll say I think Scott Dolson and Archie Miller have a really good relationship, a close working relationship. He's there around the basketball program a lot. He's, I've seen him at he may be at every game. So there's a good working relationship there. I think he's still firmly in the camp of Archie Miller is going to be a success in Bloomington. That's are you there, Jerod?
I am here. We lost you for a split second there. You said he's still firmly in the camp that Archie Miller will be a success.
Yeah. I think he's still firmly in the camp that Archie Miller is going to be successful. He was obviously there as kind of the number 2 when Fred Glass made the hire. As I said, I think they have a great working relationship, and I don't know kind of the long term impact of what's happened this spring, what that's going to do to Archie Miller's job security. You losing me again?
Yeah, but we could make out what you said. I'm just going to chalk this up. We record on Zoom. I'm going to chalk this up either to you're in a different location recording-wise, so maybe your Wi-Fi isn't as good, or everybody's doing their e-learning via Zoom, so Zoom may just be experiencing higher than normal traffic. I'm going to chalk it up to one of those two things.
Yeah, it's let's pause here for a second. Let me see if I can reconnect in a better spot.
Okay, we'll do. All right. Alex has relocated. Hopefully the internet is a little bit better. I just got to see you do the thing that I have to do all the time, which is wave my hands at my daughter to get her to go out of the room when I'm in the middle of recording something, which is something that I think all podcasters are experiencing right now as kids are home from school and they're home. Finishing touches on that answer about Scott Dolson and how him being the choice might impact Archie Miller.
Yeah, I mean, I talked a lot about obviously the relationship between the two being a strong, positive thing right now. But the other thing we don't know right now is just how is everything that's happened these last couple of weeks and could obviously go on here now for quite a while. How is that going to affect just job security and college athletics in general? Will programs be less inclined to make moves, just kind of based on everything that's gone on? It's obviously clear that Archie Miller is going to get next season to kind of come back and show that he's moving this thing in the right direction. I think we saw progress this year with the fact that they won 20 games and were going to make the NCAA tournament. I'm optimistic, just kind of based on what we saw this season, that Archie Miller is going to be in Bloomington now for the foreseeable future as the basketball coach. So I don't have any, I just think there's going to be I think there's going to be a long-standing working relationship between Scott Dolson and Archie Miller in Bloomington. That's kind of where I'm sitting at right now with what's kind of the future of the program.
Last question on Dolson. Based on what you know of him, based on what you know of the inner workings of the athletic department over the last, 5, 6, 7 years, what intuitions do you have for how things might be different under Scott Dolson than Fred Glass? I mean, I would assume that, most of the major initiatives that we saw under Fred Glass, obviously we saw major facilities upgrades, but we also saw a real move, and I think a leading move, in comparison to other schools in terms of, really putting the focus on the person, with the Excellence Academy and the Bill of Rights and the focus on mental health with the athletes. I would imagine that all of those initiatives will stay in place. I would imagine that the increased commitment to football, even if it's still not where it is at other Big Ten schools, it is increasing. I would imagine, that would continue. What do you disagree with any of that? And do you have any intuitions for how things might be different under Scott Dolson, or is that something we're just going to have to see play out once he gets the role?
Yeah, I mean, anytime there's a change in leadership, there's obviously going to be things that the former boss did that the new boss is maybe going to tweak or do a little bit differently. But I think for the most part, we're going to see, as I talked about that continuity, I think we're going to kind of continue to see a lot of the initiatives that were put in place under Fred Glass continued under Scott Dolson. You have to remember he was obviously the number 2 in the department now for a long time as most of this was being laid out, and he's he's going to probably want to do some of his own things as anyone would when they take over a new position. But I would expect many of the same policies that were put in place and continued commitment to upgrade facilities and things like that over the coming years. Although, the one thing we talk about with upgrading facilities, we don't know kind of the long-standing impact of this pandemic right now in terms of how that's going to affect network money and different shares coming from the Big Ten. So some things that that programs wanted to do, even if it's for the non-revenue sports, some of that stuff may have to get put on hold for the foreseeable future. We just don't know the long-term impact, and we may not know it for several years on kind of how that's all going to shake out. So there's a lot of moving parts with all of this, and that's kind of why I go back to saying, if you have a person that's in-house that can do a good job, I think this is kind of the time when you make the call to go to that person rather than trying to bring someone in from the outside. Even, Chris Reynolds and Pat Kraft are obviously great candidates. They're both IU graduates, but they haven't kind of been on the ground in Bloomington now for a while, and so you have somebody right there that's had his fingers on a lot of things, over the last couple of years, and kind of been a big part of kind of this. I don't want to call it a golden era of IU athletics, but there's a lot of good things going on in a lot of the sports beyond basketball at IU right now, and so I think that goes into the I think the decision making. So overall, I think it was, I don't know that IU could have made a bad decision out of those three guys, but I think they did get the right guy in Scott Dolson. We'll see how it plays out over the next few years here, but I'm optimistic that they made the right call.
All right, so we have a couple of fun special content announcements, and then we got some questions in the forum. We're going to do as much of that as we can before my daughter wakes up. She passed out on the couch watching Frozen 2, which is why we decided to bump our recording up a few hours.
Were you watching Frozen 2, Jerod?
I have not seen it yet, no.
Okay.
I have not. I do look forward to watching it with her, though. But anyway, some of you are going to hear an ad here in just a second, then we'll come back and do those special content announcements. All right, Alex, so a couple fun content announcements. The first one, which I just announced on Twitter and sent an email to our list about, something that the Assembly Call is doing with the guys at Crimson Cast and also Chris from IU Artifacts. We're doing a live IU NCAA tournament rewatch. So we picked 8 games, actually, and we're doing it on the same schedule as the NCAA tournament would be. So Friday, Sunday, and then Saturday, Monday. And starting this Friday, and we're basically doing a game from the first round of the tournament, second round, Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Four, NCAA Championship. We picked some classic NCAA tournament games, and so we're going to synchronize a live rewatch where at 8 o'clock Eastern, everybody hits play on the YouTube video, and then we're going to do a post-game show afterwards. So it should be fun if you're just, as you probably are, kind of jonesing for some basketball since you don't have it, and you want to try to approximate the experience of watching an NCAA tournament game. We wanted to try and give that to folks. So if you go to assemblycall.com, you can get the details on that, along with what games we chose, which should be fun. Unfortunately, the 2012 VCU game and the 2016 IU Kentucky game are not on YouTube, so we couldn't pick those because I definitely would have wanted to pick those. But we did get some other fun ones. So that should be a fun thing. And then we have something fun that we're going to do on Inside the Hall as well, which we're going to, Cam and Dylan are going to handle the heavy lifting for it, but we're going to kind of give them some direction. We're doing a greatest Hoosier of all time bracket. So, Alex, we're picking the 68 top players, putting them in a bracket, and letting them go one-on-one all the way toward determining the greatest Hoosier of all time using fan voting. I'm assuming we'll put polls out on Twitter for that. But we're basically splitting it up into 4 regions. So you've got the pre-night era, the first half of the night era until 1985, the second half of the night era, and then the post-night era. So those are the regions. We're going to seed players 1 through 16. There will be play-in games for the 16 seed in each region, and then all of it will be done by fan voting. Cam and Dylan, like I said, are going to handle posting it on InsideTheHall.com. We'll be doing it on Twitter, so you'll see this happen, but we just wanted to let you know that it's coming. Look, we got a lot of empty time on our hands that we would have been consuming basketball content, and finally, for the first time in 4 years, it would have been Indiana basketball content during the NCAA tournament. So we wanted to try and fill that void as best we could. Neither of these endeavors will do that fully, but, maybe 25%, 30%, something to help you get your fill. So we're looking forward to that. It should be fun. I have to say, I've had a lot of fun figuring out the regions and kind of putting the players in there and seeding. I talked to Bill Murphy. He really helped me remember a few guys that I had forgotten and had some good arguments for why players should be in, why they shouldn't be. So I'm sure there will be many arguments for players that we forgot, that people thought should have been in, all that stuff. But that's what makes a project like this fun.
It's going to be interesting to see if there's a, the guys that were left on the other side of the wrong side of the cut line. Is there going to be a lot of arguments either on the forum in the comments or on social media for certain guys that have been omitted? I've looked at the list, and to be honest with you, I don't know. I'm pretty good like with the second half of the night era on, because obviously born in 1982, and I know obviously the 76 team and the 81 team and the 87 team, but before that, I don't know a lot of the names, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how, once the voting progresses, how just kind of the names that are more familiar to people might win out based on just some of the pre night era guys. I'm not sure how much of a chance they have once they get to the Final Four. I think it's going to be tough for one of those guys to win, but it's going to be interesting to watch all play out. And I agree, it's not an easy time right now to be a sports fan. I know, Jerod, I can speak for you that I'm just absolutely crushed that we're not watching the tournament itself right now. I keep waking up every morning and thinking, man, is this just all a bad dream? We were supposed to be going somewhere this week and to watch some games, and we're not going to be doing that. So we have to keep going, though. We have to figure out other ways to kind of fill our time and fill the content and keep people engaged, because this is what we do. This is what you do with the assembly call. This is what I do with Inside the Hall. So as hard as it is to wake up and smile some of these days, we're going to try to help do our best to give the people something that can keep them entertained and talking about over these next couple of months. And hopefully at some point we can get sports back, and we'll have a lot of interesting storylines to cover when that does happen.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point about the pre-night guys, and that's one reason why I wanted to split it up into regions this way by eras, because I think it would have been hard for one of those guys to make the Final Four just because they don't have the same name recognition. Right. But I think one of the reasons that I like to do things like this is for some of the younger fans to remind them of how deep the history goes, and how, even though Knight is obviously the giant figure in IU basketball history and that era was the best overall, this program had a great history even before Bob Knight got here. He didn't build it, he built on it, and certainly left his own imprint and all of those things. But I mean, Branch McCracken won 2 titles, guys like Don Schlunt and Archie Dees and Walt Bellamy and Bill Garrett. I mean, these are massive names in the history of IU basketball and just basketball in general. And so, I'm glad that one of those guys is going to make the Final Four and get that representation. And just so everybody knows, like, I'm going to put the bracket together. You'll help me finalize it. We're doing the seeds. And I'm doing that as neutrally as possible. After that, I will no longer be a neutral observer of this contest. I will absolutely be trying to influence the electorate that Calvert Chaney is the greatest Hoosier of all time. So just know that that's coming. That's my vote for this. He's definitely going to be the guy that goes all the way for me. And so I'll be out there trying to argue that case, even though I know that there are valid arguments for, I don't know, you can probably make valid arguments for 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 guys, depending on what criteria you use. And so we'll kind of keep the greatest Hoosier criteria open so everybody can bring it. Do you pick Isaiah or Walt Bellamy, who are probably the 2 best overall players and certainly had the best NBA careers? Do you do it based on, but Isaiah only played 2 years. Do you do it based on longevity and give extra credit to guys who played 4 years? It'll kind of be open-ended, and that'll be the fun of it. Who do you think will come out of the post-night region? Because Yogi's going to be the number 1 seed, 2 Big Ten titles, obviously all the accomplishments that he had. But then you've got guys like Jared Jeffries, Victor Oladipo, Cody, some other names there that are going to give him a run for his money. Do you think that the overall popularity of Victor Oladipo will come out on top, or do you think Yogi or someone else might do it?
Wow, that's tough to project. I think Oladipo is probably going to have a good chance, just because he's the name that the most people know right now and most familiar with. He's had the most success in the NBA. He's an NBA All-Star. So that would be my projection, but I wouldn't I wouldn't be surprised if Cody Zeller has a chance. I wouldn't be surprised if Yogi has a chance either. I think those three guys to me kind of stand out in the not so distant past as the guys that would have a really good shot to get there. But it's going to be, I think there's some easy calls probably maybe in the first round. Once we get to like the round of 32, I think that's when it's going to start to get real interesting.
It's going to get hard. By the way, watch out for AJ Moye, a dark horse in the post-night region as a 12 seed. Can he spring that 12-5 upset? The numbers don't necessarily back it up, but the legend certainly will give him a chance. So anyway, that's going to be fun, and so we'll get that going. I don't know if it'll start today. It'll probably start sometime this week, so got to get that over to Cam and Dylan, and then they're going to, like I said, handle the heavy lifting of it. But should be just something fun to do and to pass the time with over the next few weeks. All right, you want to hit some of these forum questions, Alex?
Sure. Let's go for it.
Let's see. IU Hoops 22. Next year's team will be the deepest in Archie's tenure. What are his redshirting philosophies, if known, and the possibilities for them in 2021? Obviously, part of this will be dependent on if Christian Lander reclassifies or not, and there's some questions about that coming up. If we assume that he does and that he is on the roster, do you project there to be some red shirts? And obviously, the other thing, just to preface this with, we don't know what other kind of turnover there might be. Indiana could have guys transfer. They could look for grad transfers. There's still a whole lot of offseason player movement. Just watch what's happening at Wichita State right now, where they're going to have to turn over half their roster. So, I mean, you never want to speculate on who it could be. And I have, I don't really know for sure, anybody in particular, but it's college basketball, so you kind of assume someone's going to come or go, when it comes to transfers. So that's just, there are still some unknowns before you can really kind of project if someone will be redshirted. So,
yeah, I don't necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily project that it's going to happen. We have to see we obviously know that Devontae and Duran are gone. I don't think everyone else is going to be back beyond that. I just think it's natural to project that there's going to be some type of attrition without speculating on names, obviously. But I think somebody will leave. And then at this point, you have 3 guys coming in, potentially 4. That leaves you with 11 or 12 scholarship players for next year, potentially. I don't necessarily see that as a circumstance where you're going to redshirt somebody. So if I had to project on that, I would say I would not. I do not forecast a red shirt for next season. Do you agree?
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree. Because I guess the guys that you would project, I guess, would be Leal or Geronimo. Would be like if you had to say who's most likely to redshirt, I guess it would be one of those guys. Because, Trey certainly projects. I think a lot of people think that he's going to, have a role early on because of the way he defends and just the overall maturity of his game as a playmaker, even if his shooting is going to need some help. So I guess you would put it on Leal or Geronimo, but I don't know that either one of those is likely. Leal is at least going to be able to step in and you would think would be able to shoot from day one. And Geronimo, has such athletic ability. You think that he might be able to get some minutes somewhere in there. So that, tough to know for sure, but I agree with you. Those would be the guys that I would say would probably be most likely, but I don't think either one is likely, if that makes sense. From Swish, obviously we just had an abrupt end to the season, one where most fans were measuring success based on whether Indiana made the NCAA tournament. Sadly, they didn't get to play, but most all confidently believed they were safely in. Absolutely. Which of the expectations for next season team if Lander is able to reclassify and play be, and what should the expectations be if he doesn't?
I mean, the expectation of whether or not he reclassifies or not are to make the tournament. Because I think like you said, we can all agree that IU was going to make the tournament this year. Whether, it's semantics at this point. I think you look at kind of the trajectory of the win total, kind of the Ken Palm ranking, it was fair to assume that they made it. So, I had always said year 1, no postseason, year 2, NIT, year 3, NCAA tournament. Now it's make the tournament comfortably.
Yep. Because
this year was maybe a little bit, they were a little bit on the bubble, depending on who you listen to in the bracketology stuff. Now it's make the tournament comfortably and give yourself a chance to advance. You don't ever want to put a, I think if you get in the tournament with a decent seed, you have to, at that point, you assume that anything is possible, right? You assume that you could get to the Elite Eight, or you also acknowledge the fact that you could get beat the first game. I know people want to say, well, if he doesn't get to the round of 32, or if he doesn't get to the Sweet 16 or the Elite, whatever. I've never kind of subscribed to that way of thinking. Even going back to the Syracuse loss, as disappointing as it was, and as much of a turning point as it was for Crean, when you get that far in the tournament in Sweet 16, a lot of people want to just say, well, that's not that far, but there's good teams at that point. You'll be going up against situations where anybody can beat anybody, and so I think this coming year, I think the expectation should be to make the tournament comfortably, get as good a seed as possible, and then give yourself a chance to advance. I think that's all you can ask for.
Yes, I think in single season situations, you want to project the stuff that is controllable over the long term like that. You never want to say like, well, you have to make the Elite Eight. That's the kind of thing that you say over a large sample size. Like if the guy's been here 10 years and all you've done is the Sweet 16, it's like, hey, at what point are we actually going to advance in this thing? Maybe
that's
there's
what happened with
deeper
Crean,
here.
right?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
So I would say I basically echo what you said. I think the narrative, the pro-Archie narrative over the first 3 years is exactly what you laid out, which is, hey, this thing hasn't, seen the huge leap, but there has been step-by-step progress. The defense got better year one, but you still missed the tournament. Then you make the NIT, so you get to the postseason. This year, you get 9 wins in conference play, and you finally win a Big Ten tournament game, and you're going to make the NCAA tournament. So that's progress. Slow progress, but progress. So I think that progress needs to continue. And to me, that means making the NCAA tournament comfortably, which, could be a 6 or 7 seed. I'm not saying they have to be like a number 1 seed, but to the point where when all that bubble watch stuff, starts coming out in February, you're not in the still has work to do category. It's more, you're kind of in the lot category or should be in. And you're not sweating Selection Sunday. You're just thinking about, what seed, and you're not having conversations at the end of the year. Hey, if we lose this Big Ten tournament game, is that going to knock us out? Move past that. But then I also think upper half finish in the Big Ten at a minimum. This whole languishing toward the bottom and, being 12th in the Big Ten conference and stuff, like it, the context of this year is important because the Big Ten was so strong. But like at some point, let's be in the top half of the Big Ten. That should not be too much to ask for. And so I think those need to be the expectations, whether Lander comes or not, because, it shouldn't just be one player that makes or breaks. Like eventually we've got to get to that standard that just gets held year in, year out. And I think we're all being patient and allowing some time to get there. But I do think it's fair to keep raising the bar a little bit each season, especially if that's the narrative for the positives anyway, then that's got to keep going up. Let's be consistent with it. So I think upper half of the Big Ten make the NCAA tournament comfortably.
I agree.
Then don't get me wrong. If Christian Lander reclassifies, that will definitely help, and I think that raises the ceiling for the team, but it's not going to change what I expect coming in, because I also think it's fair to be a little patient with what Christian Lander can bring in his freshman year if he skips his senior year of high school. He's remarkably talented. He's an athletic guy. He's going to have an impact. He's also going to have some growing pains. So I don't want to pin so much on him. The team has some good players coming back. They've got other good players coming in. He can really help, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's all contingent on him by any means.
I mean, there's examples of guys reclassifying that are point guards that were highly ranked, and it didn't necessarily mean instant success from day one. Derek Thornton that went to Duke did that. He never really even panned out. Ashton Hagens obviously did that at Kentucky, and he's a really good player, but he was a lot better towards the end of his freshman season. And he was a top 10 type player as well. So it's not like these guys, even if they don't reclassify, it's not like any freshman is just going to come in and be Zion right away. I mean, that's just that happens once every 10 or 15 years. So you got to be realistic. I think sometimes we get too caught up in the ranking and the 5-star, and we think that means automatic all Big Ten, and that's not how it works.
Yeah. I mean, look, he would be hard pressed to be as productive as Yogi was as a freshman, maybe even to be 80% of what Yogi was as a freshman. And Yogi was very up and down. Yogi was very up and down as a freshman. Now, totally
look
different
who he was
team,
surrounded with too.
But yeah. So I want to keep saying that, just to keep expectations in check as much for myself as everybody else. But I just think it's important to keep that in mind. From IU Lord, did the Big Ten's parity help artificially boost the teams in computer rankings? I would quick quibble with the words here. It's not the Big Ten's parity, because you could have bad parity and all the teams could be bad. It was the fact that, the Big Ten teams were good and there was parity. They went out in the non-conference and beat people and kind of set that bar for the computer rankings high. And then there were basically like 12 teams that were all good to really good. So it's more than just
the complete
parity.
Foundation was laid in the non-conference. It wasn't like the computer numbers wouldn't have been what they were if the Big Ten hadn't have played well in the non-conference. They could have, if they would have been terribly in the non-conference, then the numbers when they came into conference play, it would have looked like there was a bunch of teams ranked between 70 and 100 or whatever in KenPom. Like some of these leagues that we saw, like the ACC and the SEC, there was a lot of just kind of middling teams there in the middle to the bottom of the league.
That's how the Big Ten has been itself in recent seasons.
Right, exactly. So it wasn't just that the teams beat up on each other; it was that they beat up on everybody else, and then they came and beat up on each other. So I don't think it artificially did anything. I mean, it was just kind of an uncommon year in that the Big Ten performed really well out of conference, and then it wasn't like there was one super team in the Big Ten. There was just a lot of really good teams at the top. Michigan State was obviously the best from an efficiency standpoint all year. But look at the ups and downs that they had all year. It was just the depth of the teams, I think, that was more than anything else. But I think the computer numbers were completely justified, and maybe it wouldn't have produced a national champion. We'll never know that. But I think it was going to be one of those years where we looked up and there was like 4 Big Ten teams in the Elite Eight. I wouldn't have been shocked by it.
I think if there had been a March Madness and a bracket revealed, I think it would have been very hard for me to pick against Michigan State. I think they were going to be my national championship pick.
I was probably going to pick them too.
Well. Didn't happen. Quang says, why are computer rankings so important compared to human eyeballs? I think
bias, right?
Yeah, well, there's less. Yeah, there's less bias. There's always, there's bias based on how you set it up, because there have to be certain constants and there's certain things that you value or that the people value when they're setting up their algorithm. So there's bias there, but it at least kind of standardizes the bias across all of the teams. I think any smart basketball observer, and even Ken Pomeroy, Bart Torvik, and anybody else who does computer rankings would tell you that you've got to have a combination, and you've got to understand what the computer rankings are telling you. I think the reason why people get frustrated with KenPom is it's like, oh my God, Purdue's lost 13 games. Why are they still rated so high? Well, it's not a resume judgment tool. It's based on how they've played against other teams and their efficiency on a per possession basis. How do we project them to do moving forward? That's what a lot of the computer rankings are trying to judge. And so you have to be cognizant of what they are meant to do. Whereas a guy like Gary Parrish, when he does his top 25 and 1, he's doing it just based on resume. And then, of course, you're going to have your own eyeball test, which is, all right, so I've got, this is what the team has done, this is what the computer rankings tell me, but then let me just actually watch this team. How do they function? How do they look? So, the best analysis is going to be an educated combination where people understand what the different ranking systems are actually meant to do. Don't hold those ranking systems to a standard they weren't meant to fulfill. And then you kind of balance them out because they all matter. But they're all tools to measure a different piece of what a college basketball team is, has done, or might do. And you can kind of weight them on your own based on which you think is more important or which one you're going to trust for whatever the conversation is that you're having about basketball. But I just think it's important. They're all pieces of the conversation. None of them are meant to dominate the conversation.
Agree.
All right. My daughter woke up. She is now wandering the house. She's probably going to want a snack soon. But let's keep answering questions until she comes in. Not sure where she went now, but we'll find out. Sometimes it takes her a little while to kind of wake up and, be ready to go. Have you heard or have any indications of what impact the closing of schools will have on Lander being able to meet the requirements necessary to be enrolled and reclassify?
I have no idea.
I don't either.
It's I don't know. There's it's not a great situation for a lot of people right now. So I don't necessarily think it's something we even want to speculate or discuss. I think if he's able to get his work done and reclassify, I think he'll do that. And if he's not, then he won't. But we'll just have to see how it all plays out.
Agreed. From PB Zier, if the offseason is anywhere near normal, how do you think we'll do in Maui? I hope we have Maui, number one. That's November, so it's a long way off. So certainly there's no reason to panic that won't be there. But let's just hope everything is back to normal by then.
Yeah.
First.
I don't have all the teams in front of me right now until we have the bracket. Who knows? Even if I knew the teams IU was going to play right now, I just hope they do better than they did the last time they were there, which is 1-2, and they only beat St. John's, I think. So that was like a terrible St. John's team. So
that team did turn it around, but man, they were bad that weekend.
Yeah, if they could go 2-1 or better, I think I'd be pleased with that.
So here are the teams: Alabama, Davidson, Indiana, a potentially rejuvenated North Carolina, Providence, Stanford, Texas, and UNLV.
That's a pretty favorable field to IU, I feel like.
I would say so. I would say it's fair to expect that Indiana should be able to go out there and do well. You know? I mean, look, obviously we're losing Devontae Green and Deron Davis, 4-year seniors, but we're going to have some continuity coming back. It's not like these guys are starting over. The starting lineup is going to be able to be intact if Archie wants it to be intact. A lot of your key contributors off the bench. You're going to have to replace, Devontae Green's, scoring outbursts because this team really needed that. And Deron Davis gave the team some really important minutes and some big wins. But, you're also, Trace Jackson Davis, assuming he comes back, is going to be a year older. Hopefully Rob Finney is, healthier and a little bit more ready mentally and physically to take on those, the lead point guard role. If Al Durham can continue some of the offensive improvements and assertiveness that we saw toward the end of the season, that would be big. Race Thompson and Jerome Hunter have opportunities to take big steps forward. I mean, I think, if things fall right, and we always talk ourselves into this in the offseason, and so it's fair to probably expect, maybe half of the stuff to go as right as you think it can, then I think Indiana's got a chance to be pretty good. I mean, I think this has a chance to be a bona fide top 25 team. And obviously North Carolina is going to bring in some good recruits. And I don't really know what to expect from Texas, although they played better at the end of this season. But there's no juggernauts out there. I mean, this is a tournament. Indiana, you look at it right now, I mean, why on earth would you not think that Indiana and North Carolina can be the two best teams in that field?
Right, and we don't even. North Carolina's going to have a lot of new players and new pieces to integrate, so we don't even know how they're going to be. I mean, they were awful this year, and they're losing their best player in Cole Anthony. So they're going to be more talented, but they're going to be relying on a lot of young players early in the season.
Yeah. Let's see. Are there any other questions here? Some discussion. That was all the questions. So good stuff. I should probably hop off here and go see what my daughter's doing, get her some lunch. Guess she'll be ready for it.
Maybe she's making her own lunch, Jerod.
I would not put that past her, actually. I would not put that past her. She could probably do it by now.
So real quick, we're gonna plan to keep doing a show every week as long as we can, as long as there's enough things to talk about. So
yeah,
we'll be here. We'll be here in your podcast feed. We're open to ideas. If there's anyone you want us to try to get on to talk to, we can try to accomplish that as best we can. Obviously, it's a difficult time for a lot of people. We're thinking of everyone out there who listens to the show. We thank you for your support, and just know that there's going to be better times ahead.
Absolutely. Be on the lookout for the greatest Hoosiers of all time piece, and if you want to have some fun rewatching old IU games and then hanging out with fellow IU fans afterwards, come join us for the live rewatches, which should be a lot of fun to do. Some really fun games to rewatch. I tell you what, that is the one nice thing about going through that, man. We have a lot of old NCAA tournament games to choose from. which is always a nice reminder of the history this program has. We need to build on it, no question about it, but there aren't many fan bases that could actually go through and simulate an NCAA tournament experience with classic games from every single round of the tournament, and then tack on a couple extra national championship game rewatches at the end. It's just what we do. Now let's add to it in the future. All right, everybody, take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com, and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.